Okay, welcome to the Sumer Sports Show. I'm Eric Eager. I'm joined by Thomas Dimitroff. We're a day late. Thomas, a very astute respecter of President's Day yesterday. So we didn't have a show yesterday. So we're coming to you. And because the NFL Scouting Combine is next week, and we're prepared to give everybody, including our clients and potential clients, the very best. That is Sumer Scouts and Sumer's analysis, basically on all the players, on all of our tools, on all of our basically metrics and everything. We're going early today so that we can wrap up all of our preparations for the combine. We're going early today. Thomas, how you doing?
I'm good. I didn't know if that was just a week recovery from Vegas for you because you wanted to push it out another day. I didn't think it was because we had a really busy week last week. And as you know, a lot is going on, a lot from a product release standpoint to visiting the combine to going soon to Sloan, where our fearless leader, Paul Tudor Jones, is going to be delivering to the masses in a keynote speaking engagement with Robert Kraft of the New England Patriots. So you're preparing in so many different areas, and you have to do your favorite preparation, and that's for this show. So look, I'm excited about kicking this back off. I can't wait to start rolling into the draft, free agency and draft time. I'm excited about it.
I'm excited too. And one of the other reasons I'm excited for the combine is because it's going to mark the change of a little bit of a change for the show, because as we hinted at last Monday on the show, we are going to have a new home. Not like we're not moving. We're just getting a lake house for this show, because we're still going to be on YouTube. We're still going to be on, Twitter, but on Friday nights, and then also rebroadcast throughout the weekend. This show through draft season, starting the Friday after the combine, we are going to be preliminarily. Again, we have to make sure that everything is signed and everything, but we have preliminarily agreed to have this show on Sirius XM's NFL radio, which is a really cool, I think, accomplishment, not only for the show, but for the listeners and everybody who has followed along religiously here, the Sean Donahos, the masses, everybody that's come on here and supported this show from the very beginning, from us talking about from Thomas picking games, to me trying to talk about offensive linemen and all this kind of stuff. We've really, I think, moved this show forward. So I'm really excited for that. So the Friday after the combine, everybody, we are going to put the show basically on our networks, but it will also be simulcast on Sirius XM. We're really excited about that. The show will be produced by Matt Stopsky, who was the producer of the PFF Forecast, my old podcast at PFF for a time. He's the best in the business, and he will be helping us with that as well. So really excited about that as we move forward. And that's going to be the theme kind of like of this show, as well as future shows will be NFL draft. And we're going to start that today, Mr. Dimitroff, with quarterbacks, because that is the most important position in football. It was where you had your first ever draft pick as a member of the Atlanta Falcons, where you took Matt Ryan, 3rd overall out of Boston College. And unlike some seasons, namely like 2022, there are real generational type prospects available at the very beginning of this draft. And I want to talk about them here today, Thomas. So I'm geeked.
I'm geeked as well. And I want to backtrack for a half a second. Matt Stopsky, yes, one of the best in the business. Excited about him leading us on all of this, because I think we're going to be excited about where we're going with Sirius and beyond, of course. And I think Matt being in the control room is settling for me, and I'm sure it is for you. There you go, Matt. You won't have lauding for the rest of the season, but there you go.
We're going to add Matt to the stage here.
Hey, what's up? Thanks for the love. Appreciate it.
We're going to remove Matt from the stage here just because we don't have the 3 thing for that long. But yeah, we really appreciate Matt. Okay, Thomas, you, of course, you got one opportunity to pick a quarterback, and with your time at the Atlanta Falcons, you took Matt Ryan. Whether or not Matt Ryan belongs in the Hall of Fame is up for debate, but he was the best Falcons quarterback that's ever lived, and obviously took you guys to great heights. You nailed that pick, if you're sitting here and you are Ryan Poles at pick number 1, you are Adam Peters at pick number 2, or you are Gerard Mayo / the kind of consortium that now is the New England Patriots front office that has still yet to name a GM, or a bunch of other individuals who are looking to maybe trade up. There is a collection of quarterbacks that we're going to talk about today. Where do you want to start?
I want to start by saying absolutely disagree with you. It's not up for question that Matt Ryan is a Hall of Famer. He is. It may be up for debate whether he's a first ballot, and that's beside the point. You know this. Most Hall of Famers don't love when people start talking about first ballots, kind of like it's flippant, right? So we have to give everyone the respect. I think Matt categorically is a Hall of Famer. It's just a matter of when. There, I've said that as well. Now, moving forward on quarterbacks. Are you going to debate me on that again? Because you might have a debate point. I mean, he missed 1.5 games in 14 years for us at Atlanta, and he did some great things, and we really literally got to the Super Bowl, but we actually
won an MVP. Like, there's not that many quarterbacks that win an MVP in this league that don't end up in the Hall of Fame, to your point. I think he'll end up being there. I mean, the question is like, before we get to the guys that are coming in this draft, it's a question of like, Matt Ryan's a much better player than Eli Manning, but Eli Manning won 2 Super Bowls. And so like, who gets in first, right? Because both guys are kind of in depending upon how you frame it, both guys are deserving. I think Ernie Accorsi would say, of course you put Eli Manning in the Hall of Fame. We drafted him, or we drafted Phillip Rivers, and then we traded for Eli Manning for the reason that he gave us 2 Super Bowls. And then you would say, you drafted Matt Ryan and he gave you exactly what you wanted, which is steady, consistent, elite play at the quarterback position. And, and ultimately, I think both guys have a really good case. And that's just an example of how tough it is, because the league was in your own division, you had Drew Brees, who's also who's also a Hall of Fame caliber player. And it was, and the fact that it's even a question that Matt Ryan's going to make it is probably because of Drew Brees, because you probably win 10 straight division titles if it wasn't for Drew, right? So it's an incredibly interesting question, because he came in at a time where quarterback play was at its peak in the NFL, which kind of transitions into where we are now, where quarterback play is not at its peak in the NFL. The fact that we're going to talk at the end of the podcast about Kirk Cousins again being the crown jewel of a free agency class at 36 years old, speaks to the fact that this league needs an influx of young quarterback talent now that Matt's out of the league, that Drew Brees is out of the league, that Tom Brady's out of the league, et cetera, which means that nailing these picks and putting these guys in the proper environment is essential to this process.
So I would say, and it is a perfect segue. We know the quarterbacks are basically what is hung over any general manager's head, right? We've talked about this many times, and I don't want to beat it to death, but it is what it is. You can't be considered a top-notch team builder / general manager in this league without picking a legit quarterback somewhere. Whether if you didn't necessarily do it in the draft, you needed to definitely secure it in free agency consistently. So we know how important that is. You are judged by who you put at the helm, along with the coaching position, of course. But as a quarterback, it's vital. So we start talking about, it's not always, Eric, about the best, the most elite athlete, the most elite passer, the strongest arm. We've seen that many times. There have been great strong arms out there that have not survived as quarterbacks in this league. It's about taking the entire picture into consideration, right? So many levels. Before we get into the literal talent that these guys have, their skills, and we can talk a lot about that, and we will over the next couple months for sure. Understand that there is an entire package there that you need to consider, and you can't get away from something that is very difficult to measure in data, and you know that: psychological, passion for the game, work ethic, heart. These are all things that we've talked many, many times at Sumer. Could we pull out anything that would give us an indication of some of these much more subjective evaluations. So I guess what I'm saying in the end is it's going to be really important for us to go into these sessions moving forward and to talk a lot more about how we're going to look at everything from a big picture data as well as a subjective standpoint.
Yeah, and it's interesting to your point. Like there are so many things that we've found, that, and quarterback's the biggest one, right? There's few of them that get drafted every year, and there are relatively few data points that translate incredibly well from college to pro. The one I do want to talk about, and let's not start with the guy who's going to be considered the top pick. Let's start with the guy who's going to be considered the third pick, because I had a tweet this week, which I know, Thomas, you're not on Twitter, but I would guess that if you were on Twitter, you would have a much more entertaining account than me. But I tweeted this out. Are people concerned that Jaden Daniels' college pressure to sack ratio, which is really like pretty poorly named, I'm going to go after my old employer here. It should be sack to pressure ratio because it's sacks divided by pressures, was really high. And that has traditionally translated better than basically everything we've measured for college quarterbacks. Are people concerned about that, or is this one different? I think a lot of times we look at players, and if we really like a guy, we overlook some of the question marks here. And if we don't like a guy, we look at the bad things and we gravitate towards that. When I watch Jaden Daniels play and I look at his statistics, they're phenomenal, especially last season. But there is this one thing that in 2022 with LSU, 30% of the pressures he took turned into sacks. And that has almost always translated from year to year. When you see that as a team builder, when you see that as an evaluator, and you're looking at the traits that a player has, what comes up in your mind?
Well, I want to mention the next part of that stat and data that I had been giving was the idea that it was 20.2%, right, in 23. So there's an improvement there. And I know in our conversations earlier, you were asking me, is that something to be concerned about? Are we buying that? So I know I have an opinion of whether I'm buying improvement. I do buy improvement. I don't want to overly analyze where I'm digging the hell out of certain things that will, prop up this idea that, Jaden Daniels isn't as good as advertised and he had 1 year. But that's what we want to see, right? We want to see it. As my chief of staff, if we were putting on team building hats right now and we were at a team, let me ask you that. Does that difference of 30.8 to 20.2 from 22 to 23 sack percentage, does that concern you? Because I want to fold back in after your response.
I think it's good, right? I think the fact that he's gotten better is certainly beneficial, because if you look, like, let's compare him to Drake May. Over the course of their careers, Jaden Daniels' sack to pressure ratio is about 24%. Drake May is about 18%. That's a big difference. But if you just look at last year, Drake May and Jaden Daniels are about the same. And so Drake May got worse and Jaden Daniels got better. And so I think if you want to look positively at Jaden Daniels, you're saying, okay, he got better. He learned the offense. He got more comfortable. And then he was able to process things more quickly. I think that that's good. However, we know the nature of football is, people call it the sophomore slump or the Sports Illustrated jinx. But there's a mechanism for it, right? It's Mac Jones goes to New England. Josh McDaniels coaches the hell out of him. He plays really well. Josh McDaniels gets a head coaching job. Mac Jones has to learn a new offense. And we don't have to make a value judgment about who the offensive coordinator is. But, like, change sucks for young quarterbacks. And so how young offensive coordinators, or in the case of Josh McDaniels, just guys who are wanting to get a new job, how these guys generally get new jobs is to take a young quarterback and to have him overachieve. But that, generally speaking, means that for that guy, he's got to thrive in a new environment. When Baker Mayfield had a really good rookie year for him, that meant Freddie Kitchens got a head coaching job. And so now Freddie Kitchens has to do so many more things. He can't coach Baker Mayfield. when Baker Mayfield has a pretty good year in Tampa Bay this year for him, Dave Canales gets a head coaching job in Carolina, and the cycle continues. And so part of me sees a guy get comfortable in a new offense as a good thing, but part of me sees it as a bad thing, right? Because you almost always have to deal with change in the NFL. And so I see a guy like in the history of the NFL, you look at guys who have struggled from one year to the next, oftentimes are the better pros. Josh Allen was better his second to last year in Wyoming. Jordan Love was better his second to last year at Utah State. Justin Herbert was better. Brock Purdy, all those guys were actually better in previous years in their career in college than they were their last year. And so that's where I get a little bit worried.
I guess, again, guy transfers from Arizona State, right? Solid, everything going well, comes in, gets 2 years in here. We want to see that as GMs, right? And personnel departments. We want to see the ever improving, the evolution of an individual as a player. I mean, simple fact, 7.5 yards per pass attempt in 22 versus 11.5 this year. Like, that's what I want to see. And I also want to see, let's put the stats aside for a minute. When I watch this cat play and I watch his ability to get back in there, what is he, 6'3" and a little bit? Yes, he's lean. There's been a lot of lean quarterbacks. They grow into their bodies. This kid is an excellent athlete. This kid has ability to have awareness. He has awareness in the pocket and ability to escape, ability to run when he needs to, and run big. He's got how do I say this? I mean, he's got the courage to run. He's not afraid of taking a hit. I want to be mindful, though, if I'm the GM or the head coach, like, man, just be careful when you're down there. He's taken some big ass hits where guys have sandwiched him, right? Different sides. I think that's important to be mindful as he's moving forward. But he does all that, and then he can sit back in there and pop the deep ball. I think he can pop at all levels. He gets the ball out. He runs when he needs to. He can zip it in. I just think you're seeing the growing of a quarterback that can be very good in this league. Again, remember, I'm conscientious about not using the overly exaggerated phrases that an Eric Eager will often use. I'm only because I want to make sure. Am I claiming he's going to be very good in this league? Is he going to be excellent, or is he going to be rare? And remember, our rare grade is a 9, excellent is 8, 7 is a very good. So if I'm flipping this back to you, you look at him and you look at how he's growing right now, early stages of our draft. We'll talk about him so many times over the next couple months. Where do you see him now? Do you see him as a top tier? Do you see him as excellent or only very good at this point?
I would probably, and again, just have some patience with me because I don't scout. Like, I would say I would put him at a 7.5. Like, I think he's a very good prospect. I think if a team chooses him in the top 3, there's no backlash from me. Like that, to your point, I think you said this to me off air in the office today. You have to pick somebody, right? And he's not Malik Willis. He's not even Will Levis. He's better than that.
Yes.
So you have to take, and if you are a team like Washington, who has tried the Sam Howell bit, has tried the Alex Smith bit, has tried the every way possible, even the Dwayne Haskins at 15, and God rest his soul. Like, you've tried every single way. You tried RG3, right? You got to get an elite. An elite's the wrong word. Sorry. You have to get a player with the upside to compete, because you look at your division and the Eagles were just in the Super Bowl. The Dallas Cowboys were just the 2 seed in your own conference. The New York Giants are a team that has competed before. You're not going to win without trying to get a quarterback who's going to have a Matt Ryan type outcome, and you're not going to get those players at pick 15 and pick 30. So you have to try. So if a team took him at 3, or 2, I wouldn't be upset.
Well, okay, let's go as far as this. If a team takes him at 2, you wouldn't be upset. Why the hell would you be upset if they took him at 1? I'm only throwing devil's advocate here.
Yeah.
Only because we know Caleb Williams is special. And both of those guys, in my mind, are excellent. Some might claim rare, right? but they're top tier guys as well. I think Drake May is right in there. You have 3 quarterbacks in the top 6 picks. There's going to be a lot of salivating contemplation, so to speak, when you're all the way up to 12 and you're thinking, man, how do I get up there to get one of these 3 quarterbacks? This is a really good group. And then there's another group of quarterbacks. We'll talk about one today, but there's other quarterbacks in there that make this a really, I think, stout, legitimate quarterback group.
There's a Jordan Love type player that pairs with the Burrow, Tua, Herbert, right? That was that draft where it was Burrow, Tua, Herbert in the top 6, and then Jordan Love and Jalen Hurts in that second tier of guys that have been useful NFL quarterbacks, to your point. And that is a really good question for a team builder. Do you mortgage the future to go get one of the top guys, or do you wait and take one of the other guys? It's all about where you are in your team building. It's a good question. Go ahead.
Well, and we're going to move on. I know we could talk all day on this, and I'm loving it. Okay. So once again, you're in a situation at the number 1 pick where you have someone who's just a little bit shorter, called the way it is, than some of the other prospects, right? We saw what happened at Carolina. Not saying that's why, but a lot of people started taking shots early on when they started seeing, Bryce out there on the field, right? And they're like, whoa, I thought he might have been even a little bit bigger than that 5'10" or whatever it is. Now you have an opportunity where you have, again, I want to see him on the tape. Is he a 6'2 3/4? Is he a 6'3"? I'm talking about Jaden Daniels. And where does Caleb Williams come in, right? So all I'm saying about the first overall pick, and I know there'll be people that would argue with me, as a general manager and a head coach, you have to sit down and look at all 3 of these, and you have to look beyond just the arm strength. You have to look beyond the movement in the pocket and how many rushing yards. You have to look to character. You have to look to intelligence. You have to look to resiliency. I mean, all these things that buddies of yours who are in those quarterback analysis positions, a number of them that you talk about all the time, they're going to look at it and they're going to say, all right, let's do our due diligence and make sure we don't just say 100%, 90% we're going to take Caleb Williams. You have to look into all these elements. And some may fit. Drake May, we might not even be talking a whole bunch about Drake May right now in this top 3 because we're thinking it's 1 and 2 somehow. But that may not be the case. There may be a team out there that's looking for Drake May's makeup. I'm not just talking about character, but makeup.
We should make a bid. It's Dre's makeup.
There you go. I got it.
Well, so I want to ask you a question because this is where I've come to appreciate this so much more working with you, because there's, you watch football players and you realize like production is different than traits. And I'm not going out on a limb here. Jaden Daniels' 2023 season is the best quarterback season of any player in this draft, correct? Like Caleb Williams last year in 22 was not as good as Jaden Daniels was in 23 from a production, right? Production does not equal production. But we have seen that the final year production can be indicative, right? You remember 2018, Baker Mayfield kind of leaned in at the tape and beat out Sam Darnold and Josh Rosen. And Josh Rosen and Sam Darnold prior to that draft were considered better prospects than Mayfield for a number of reasons, right? Makeup, size, all this stuff. And Baker, just because he was so productive at the last year of Oklahoma, won out. And there were things there. Now, one of the issues, though, was the 2 best quarterbacks in that draft were not Rosen and Darnold. They were Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen. Josh Allen's the 2nd best quarterback in the whole league. And that's where I get a little bit – that's where I look at Caleb Williams, and I think Williams was a much better player production-wise in 2022 than he was last year. There were so many kind of other than losing to Utah twice, there weren't that many flaws on his sheet in 22, right? Then you look at this season, Thomas, and I kind of want to bring this up to you. His pressure to sack ratio went from 16% in 2022. So when he was pressured, he was only sacked 1 out of every 6 pressures in 2022. This year it went up to 23. So 1 out of every 4 pressures was a sack. Mm-hmm. But the biggest one, and this has been his thing the whole time, 3.27 time to throw. So when he drops back, it takes him 3.27 seconds to get rid of the ball or get sacked. And just to give you a little context, Patrick Mahomes this year, in his toughest season, no receivers, an offensive line that was his league worst, Patrick Mahomes this year was his first year with more than 3 seconds time to throw. And you watch those Chiefs games, and he's trying to manufacture plays, and like it's ugly. And that has been Caleb Williams his whole career at USC. So the question that I have is, if you read that as a team builder or as a head coach, and you're thinking to yourself, I just need Caleb Williams to trust the play. I just need Caleb Williams to color in the lines. While I know that part of the reason we're all thinking of him as this generational prospect, this brilliant player, I push back, an 8 or a 9, is because he's an artist.
Yeah.
How do you reconcile that? Because that's where I look, and some of the red flags come up for me, because I think to myself, sometimes some of these great quarterbacks struggle because the offense just needs them to succumb to the easy throws. I just need an easy throw. I need you to get 7 on 1st and 10 as opposed to running around and taking a hit. Do you get worried about that?
Look, let's immerse ourselves or project ourselves into a draft room with some intense conversation about this. If you're a supporter of Caleb, you're saying it's all creative, it's athleticism, it's awareness. You go, and it's what we want. If you're the person battling it, or the person being negative and questioning whether, the naysayer, the critic, which we need some of those people in the draft room, right? They are suggesting what you're suggesting. Oh, my concern, could he do that in the NFL when there's a lot more pressure on him, and he's not going to have the same amount of time, but he's going to have more time than 3/4 or even more, 80% of the quarterbacks out there, I believe, given his creative ability. So all I'm saying is understand that when we are discussing those guys inside those hallowed halls of these buildings, there's going to be the counterpoint on it. And I think it's up to us. You brought up context. I will say this all the time, and Eric hears me say this to all of our listeners: context, context, context. For football people who are talking more and more data, they need context. It's not just Patrick Mahomes. You need to dig out, if you were a chief of staff or whatever you're presenting to the group or the coaches, you need to pull out, I'm talking about anyone, you need to pull out more. You need to pull out more context on that. Show the different levels. I mean, show where some of those guys are. Did we make a mistake? Okay, your buddy Baker, you'll talk about forever and ever. Where was he? Where were a couple of these other quarterbacks that were either athletic movement quarterbacks or productive quarterbacks? And let us know where some of these main names were so we can compare. Again, everyone understand this. We are a comparative profession, and we need context. We need context in contracts. When we're sitting there telling our owner, yeah, I want to sign this guy to $190 million or $240 million contract, I need context on who's ever been close to that. Obviously, there wasn't anyone there, right? So just to put that to rest a little bit, we love that moving forward, Eric, as we're talking. Don't just fold in one of the greatest ever. Let's fold in some of the good ones out there, or the very good ones that are probably more in line with our guy, Caleb.
Yeah. So for example, Josh Allen, his final year at Wyoming was about 3.07 time to throw. So a little bit less. Baker Mayfield, interestingly, we always think of Baker Mayfield as a catch and throw guy, but his was right around 2.93. So even some of these like guys who we think more of, I call them color between the line guys, it's a way to think about it, are still holding onto the ball longer. Thomas, the average is kind of around 2.5, 2.75 in the NFL. In the NFL, because of the mismatch on the offensive line versus the defensive line, you have to be able to get rid of the ball quickly. And again, we talk about Mahomes. It's not great, but like it is instructive. When Patrick won the MVP in 2018, his average depth of target on his touchdown passes was 18 yards. This year, it was 4 yards. So he's had to evolve from a guy just whipping it. I remember, obviously, the preseason game against you guys in 2018, where he threw that 70-yard ball to Tyreek in your state in Atlanta. He's not throwing those touchdowns. He's had to learn to dump the ball off and be content. And obviously Caleb is not going to come into the league with that. Like, football's a game of fun, right? It's not fun to dump the ball. I think of Tom Brady as like his biggest attribute was being content throwing the ball to Shane Vereen and Kevin Falk and guys like that. And, that's a question. But to your point, you want to have the guy who's capable when the game's on the line to whip a ball downfield the way that Caleb is, because no one in this class has the arm angle, the elasticity, and all that stuff that he has.
His adaptability and movement and throwing here, throwing there, off bounce, all that. You mentioned or alluded a little bit earlier on Caleb's sack, right? His taking of sacks in 23, I think it was 23.2 versus this year or last year at 16%. And what, we've talked about that. What happened here? It's the other way, kind of, right? From Jaden. Are you concerned about that? Is this something where we're concerned about D coordinators coming in after the winning of a Heisman and saying, we're going to stop this dude? And what causes that? And have you dug in any more that way? Again, if I were to ask you to present me with the right data.
Well, yeah, I think that there's two ways to look at it. There's the regression. So statistically speaking, it's not as big of a red flag as you think, because a lot of times these quarterbacks with really with good traits when you have the great traits, you show it quickly in college football. Justin Herbert as a sophomore at Oregon was already being considered a top pick. Even Tua Tagovailoa was more efficient as a younger player at Alabama than he was as a junior and senior. I can't remember if he declared early, but like Josh Allen, same thing. Jordan Love, same thing. The thing that you get worried about is the book out on this guy? But I actually think it's a little bit different. I think that if college defensive coordinators can kind of figure you out a little bit and you still can be pretty productive. And when you look at Williams' stats, they're not as good as 2022, but they're not awful, right? He's still averaging like 8. Like, you look at Caleb Williams, for example, with a clean pocket, Caleb Williams averaged 10 yards a pass attempt with 22 touchdowns and 1 interception, meaning when they blocked up the play, he was still phenomenal, right? Statistically. And so I think that bodes well, right? Whereas the worry about a guy like Daniels, who is not a one-hit wonder, he was still a good college player the whole time, but a guy whose best year is as a senior, the worry is that the first time he's going to hit adversity is in the NFL, where everything is already faster. Whereas a guy like Caleb, if he already hits a little adversity in the college, he's already thinking about how to adapt. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a good trait. And we've seen that, right? And the guy, Sean is over here modeling this in the other office. It's oftentimes more predictive if you use the guy's best college season and not necessarily his last college season, if that makes sense.
It makes sense. And I was going to ask you, back to context, and I don't want to put you on the spot here. You talk about that 33.2% pressured pocket this year for Caleb. Where are we in the NFL versus the NCAA, and how much, without getting into specifics, maybe you have a take on it, how much more of an issue is it? In college, we know sometimes they're running around doing all kinds of stuff like we have seen, and they're able to get the balls off, and we know that's not happening in the NFL. That pressured pocket in the NFL, what is a let's call it an upper tier quarterback? What is his pressure in the pocket? Is it significant? Is it significantly more or less?
Yeah. So last season, 2023, the leader in the NFL was Justin Fields. He was pressured on 49% of dropbacks. Daniel Jones, Will Levis, Zach Wilson, Tommy DeVito, Bailey. So now you're also getting an idea of the quarterback bears some responsibility for the pressure, because all the guys I'm talking about are not particularly good players yet. Yeah. Russell Wilson's at 41%. Jalen Hurts, interestingly, with that great offensive line in Philadelphia, is at 41%. Bryce Young's at 41%. The guys who face the least amount of pressure Tua Tagovailoa at 25%, Trevor Lawrence, interestingly, at 30%, Joe Burrow at 31%, Jordan Love at 31%, Derek Carr. The guys at the lower end, those guys are schemed, right? Miami is schemed. Jacksonville schemed. Cincinnati, now, we all talked about how bad Cincinnati's offensive line was when they were making the Super Bowl push. Now they got Orlando Brown, they got Karras and guys like that in there. They've done – the median is about 35 to 40%. And so Williams only being pressured 33% at the college level is not necessarily – he's not under siege relative to what he's going to be at the NFL level. It's kind of a little bit below average of what he's going to see in the NFL level. So, that's another thing to think about. And I think he's maybe not – I would say he's not unprepared for pressure in the NFL, but he's not overly prepared is another way to put it.
Great discussion. I mean, I know there are other quarterbacks out there in this group. We haven't talked about Drake May, and we can touch on him or not, or we can go to someone else that you've been bringing up, some big-time Michigan quarterback that maybe because we're talking about Coach Harbaugh a little bit. Do we want to go there, or do we want to talk Drake May for a minute?
Well, so we'll talk about May a little bit later. I think that May is a classic example of kind of like traits versus production. McCarthy's another one. So I want to touch on one brief thing with McCarthy because I want to get your take on this. Because Harbaugh is a championship coach. They won a championship in Michigan. They've made 3 straight college football playoffs. McCarthy very clearly has some positive traits to him. However, I like to look at what the coach asks a player to do. And if I'm looking at Harbaugh, and he can say all these things about J.J. McCarthy, and he says glowing things about him, but when the chips are down, he's giving the ball to Blake Corum, and he's giving the ball to Donovan Edwards and the running backs in Michigan, and they have a great offensive line. You look at those guys are going to be drafted kind of at every round in this draft coming up. Do you get worried when a guy in college doesn't have the kind of volume, when his offense doesn't depend upon him, when he's not the best player on his own offense? Do you get worried about that?
Yes, of course I do. And I also get worried about people lauding players for their run of wins throughout high school, right? Mm-hmm. And college, because we've seen some great ones out there leading up to that. And then when they made it into the pros, they're not thriving. They've had a great run, and God bless them for it. I think it's amazing. I'm not throwing a dart at JJ. I like JJ McCarthy quite a bit. There was talk early on that he was a mid-second to third rounder, and there's no doubt in my mind that he's going between 20 and 32. That pocket there, I think, if not earlier, you never know. There's some people out there talking about the Giants and potentially he's going to go by 15 or even 12. Who knows where all that goes? I guess what I'm saying to you is he's a good quarterback. He's a winner. He's smart. Oh, by the way, you northern people, he's a hockey player by trade. He loved hockey more than he liked football. I don't know if you read that. I thought it was pretty good. He's an Illinois guy, right? If I'm not mistaken. And he's a guy that's versatile, and he's a winner. I love it. I love what he's done there. Is he a game manager? And are you worried about what some people consider a game manager? But he's got good athleticism. I think he does some really fine stuff when the pressure is on, which I love to see as well. There are guys like this, and we've seen guys like that who are ultimately competitive and pull themselves out of some really interesting spots because of that element, because they're very smart. This guy's, to me, very interesting. Where do you get him? Do you think you really pull him off the board the back end of the first round? I don't know.
Yeah, and this gets back to, and there's a really interesting tweet, and we've seen this tweet a bunch ever since Mahomes, right? Where it's, oh my God, look at the success of players who have sat, right? And it's Mahomes sat for a year, Jordan Love and Aaron Rodgers sat for multiple years. You should sit your rookie quarterback. And it's like, if the Jaguars could have sat Blake Bortles for a year, they would have. They tried. They played Chad Henne for 3 games, but they were so bad that they had no choice. Everybody's like, you're not going anywhere. Play Bortles. I think, like, JJ McCarthy might end up in a situation very similar where he goes to, let's say, Atlanta, and they pick him 8th or something, or maybe Atlanta trades back, and Atlanta's got Kirk Cousins as a starter, and JJ McCarthy can learn from Cousins, and then he plays in 3 years, and he does really well. And it's all about like the environment that a guy goes in. I think if you pick JJ McCarthy 3rd and he goes to the Patriots and they don't have a fully formed offensive line and they don't have receivers and and the defense takes a step back because Belichick is so good at making the defense more than the sum of the parts, and maybe Gerard Mayo is not quite as good, and he falters, you have no one really to blame but yourself, because he's not that transcendent kind of prospect, and there are very few of them. So, like, I think of McCarthy as a guy that can go to a ready-made team and be okay and build it up. I just don't see him as the kind of guy that can go and build a team from scratch. That's kind of my take.
Yeah, I mean, again, you have to have – I believe this with any quarterback, especially young quarterbacks, of course, any quarterbacks. You have to have the supporting cast. I learned that. I mean, I've been around football a long time, but when I went into Atlanta, I definitely – and this, again, I've said was heresy, that I looked at Mr. Polian and I said, Bill, I think your approach to this, even though the Bills were probably, over many years were heavy competitors, Bill Belichick and Bill Polian – I did look at what they did at the Colts, and they surrounded with the right people. Matt Ryan, as good of a quarterback as I think and thought he was, would never have had the opportunity to thrive as he did if he didn't have the people around him. And I feel I'm happy that we did that, right? We had running backs, we had tight ends. By the way, tight ends. I'll say that many times.
Yeah.
Put a stall of tight ends around a young quarterback, and your percentage shots are so much better. Air it out when you need to air it out. Get creative with that. I think it's vital. So, which brings me back to JJ. Is JJ McCarthy, let's say he goes to the Giants, Eric. Do you think the Giants are truly looking for a quarterback? Is it time? Because they're not sure what they really have. They're coming off of an injury with a quarterback that I still wonder if that's a lot. That's a big move to be shouldering for Brian Daboll and Joe Shane to tell, Mr. Mara, hey, look, we're ready to go after another quarterback now.
I think that a lot of times, and you can speak to this better than me having been in the seat, but a lot of times the move comes from ownership as much as it comes from the front office. And so that message to say, hey, like, let's hedge our bets on Daniel Jones is maybe it's not easy. Maybe, it's not easy, but the conundrum that the Giants are in is if they want to make moves to better their roster, they kind of have to restructure Daniel Jones, which means Daniel Jones is likely going to be on the team longer than the 1 year. Like, they can get out from under Daniel Jones after this year as long as they don't make adjustments to his contract. But they have to make adjustments to his contract to sign other players. And so to make adjustments to his contract, they have to guarantee more. So they're in like a catch-22, which is rough. I think that would be a perfect place to put him. Now, picking him where they're going to pick, which is like a top 6 pick, is a little rich for my blood. I would probably try to trade back and accumulate more picks. But again, there's going to be some team. Every draft, there's a team that falls in love, just like the Giants in 2019 fell in love with Daniel Jones at pick 6 when everybody was thinking of him as a 10, a 16 type of player. There's going to be a team that falls in love with McCarthy, and I think you have to let somebody else fall in love with JJ McCarthy is my take.
Here's your data. Of course you're going to say move back. Let me challenge you with this. If you're the Giants and you're looking Mr. Mara in the eye as a head coach and a general manager, why are you not saying, let me jump up into the big boys? Let me move up from 6 to 4-3. Why would you not do that?
I would. I would say, look, Mr. Mara, you've used 2 top 10 picks on tackles. You have the tackles there. Like we said this at Super Bowl Radio Row. I thought you did really well with Tom Curran. Everybody, by the way, at NBC Boston, I hope I'm going to say this so you don't get in trouble. Everybody at NBC Boston lobbying everybody in that city and everybody in the whole New England area for Thomas Dimitroff. Everybody wanting Thomas Dimitroff there. They were clamoring, every Boston station at the Super Bowl, and they got Thomas on. The Patriots should want to move back, right? Because they're a team that the cupboard is kind of bare. And if you put a quarterback on that team with expectations, I worry about what will happen because their roster needs a rebuild. They're sitting perfectly as a trade back candidate because there is going to be a team like the Giants who have 2 tackles who can protect that quarterback to move up to 3 and take that quarterback, whether it be May or Daniels, whoever that third guy is. I agree. Like, I think you go up and get one of the top 3 guys, or you trade back and let the market dictate who you take between Nix, McCarthy, Penix, one of those guys. You let the market dictate that decision because you already have Jones anyway.
Do you think they have the supporting cast? I love that reasoning. What about the skill positions?
They don't, but you made the one trade up for Julio Jones, and in that draft, AJ Green was also very good. If you list top 10 wide receivers and how well they've done in the draft, your Julio pick was an exception and not the rule. I love these wide receivers in this draft. Historically speaking,
good group.
Quarterback, wide receivers taken high struggle because a wide receiver taken in the top 10 has to be everything, everywhere, all at once. They have to be Julio. They have to be big, fast, strong, catch every ball, block. They have to be everything. The modern wide receiver is not that, right? The modern wide receiver is Henry Ruggs, who is the last, the modern wide receiver is even Drake London, Drake London was a top 10 pick, and he does a lot of things well. Would you consider, was Drake London the best receiver in his class? No. Garrett Wilson, there's other guys that have eclipsed him. And I just think most of the time you can get, has Jahan Dotson lived up to his draft position? No. You can get very good value where the Ravens drafted Zay Flowers, where the Vikings drafted Jordan Addison, where the Bengals drafted T. Higgins, because the stakes are lower when you take a guy at 30 or 45, because the NFL is a rotational league at wide receiver. So to answer your question, if the Giants stay at 6 and take Odunze and let's say Marvin Harrison's kid falls to them, it'll be very tempting to take him. But historically speaking, taking wide receivers in those spots has not been a good bet. And you're the one exception where you took Julio, he's Hall of Famer, but it's not a great bet. So I get that. I would do something else to get a wide receiver in New York.
So my one response to that, I get it. I've taken a lot of heat over the years on one side, and I've had other people laud for the decision that we made, at the Falcons for Julio. And I go back every year, it surfaces the 16 Super Bowl, and I watch Julio Jones catching one of the best catches in the history of the world. I'm being exaggerative, but it was, right? To move down, to kick a field goal, to win the Super Bowl. But it revolved around Matt connecting with an unbelievable player on our team. No one else could have made that play. It was him, and we didn't finish it.
But even think about the circumstances upon which you drafted Julio. Roddy White was your alpha wide receiver, right, and you were struggling as an offense to get over the hump. Not struggling. You were a 13-3 team, but you drafted Julio, and he wasn't your alpha wide receiver until 2 or 3 years later, right? He was he's very good number 2, and then he grew into the guy, the mega star eventually. Yeah. But if you take Marvin Harrison Jr. at 6 or 4 or 5, you expect him to be the number 1 guy, right? Randy Moss was the wide receiver 3 behind Jake Reed and Chris Carter. That's where, and so even Julio, now AJ Green with Cincinnati 2 picks earlier was the alpha day 1. And so that's a counterexample to what I'm saying, but that's where I struggle taking wide receiver high, because he is expected to be wide receiver 1 right away. And that's just a tough position to be the X receiver on an NFL team right away. That might not be enough of a reason for the Giants to cut bait on Daniel Jones and to move up and take Jaden, whatever. But that is my counterexample, is even in your Julio pick, which was really good. and I'm going to write an article for Sumer as to why it's smarter than what people think. Even like, I think the draft curves are wrong when a good team trades up high for a pick. I think that even that pick is illustrative of the whole point, which is you had Roddy White in tow as wide receiver 1, and then Julio in 3 years was wide receiver 1 because he could grow into it.
Yeah, he did not lead targets until 2014. So that's 11, 12, 13 in his 4th year, right? So I'm talking about Julio. So yeah, no, I get it. It's an interesting discussion point, and I would ask you, if you're that smart and that in tune with drafts, how about a little trivia? Who straddled those 2 picks between AJ Green and Julio Jones? What team was it? San Fran?
So 2010, the Niners were 6-10. So were they picking between you? Was it San Fran?
Stopsky, look it up.
I mean, I could look it up right now.
Oh, yeah, I know. I should have the answer to this.
San Fran was, the 2011 draft is. It was another Hall of Famer.
No,
Patrick Peterson.
Alden Smith. Come on, Coach.
No.
Yes.
No,
Alden
Patrick
Smith.
Peterson was picked 5th by the Cardinals that year.
Yeah, 7th was Alden Smith.
7 with Alden Smith.
I was saying straddling the 2 receivers.
Yeah, so it went. So this is a hell of a draft. Cam Newton, Von Miller, Marcel Darius was pretty good. Not whatever, but not good compared to everybody else. AJ Green, Patrick Peterson, Julio Jones, Alden Smith, who would have been Alden Smith was Derek Thomas, and
Alden Smith was a fantastic athlete, really, really good. And I remember. Do you know who picked him? Of course we know. Trent Baalke.
Trent Baalke, yeah.
And Trent Baalke loved D lineman, but Trent Baalke was also in a spot where he knew how good he was. And this goes back to what we've said many times. Little aside. When you go to your owner as a team builder, any of you budding team builders, GMs or head coaches, or call you GMs and personnel directors, make sure you get it very straight from your owner. Can I hit on a guy if I lead sacks in 2 years and get us to the Super Bowl, and then years later, or 2 or 3 years later, I just completely explode and don't survive? My question is always, let me know what the parameters are, Mr. Owner, as a general manager, because I can get you some of the best talent. They may be short-lived because of their character and personalities.
Right, exactly. Because like for every Julio Jones who, from what I can tell and what you've told me, impeccable character, also in addition to being a phenomenal, I can say a phenomenal. He's going to be in the Hall of Fame. You can allow me that. He's a great player. But like Justin Blackmon, who, when he was on the field and contributing, made play after play after play, but was not reliable, picked around the same time, by Jacksonville, a few picks a few years later. To your point about, if I need a quick sugar high of great football, Justin Blackmon's probably your guy. But if I need sustained success in the NFL, it's a different calculus.
Do we need to talk about any free agent to pack this together? Kirk Cousins a little bit, or would you just want to keep it at college today?
Let's just breathe. So your former team, the Falcons, obviously they're picking 8th again. Let's just talk for 5 minutes about Kirk Cousins, because I think that March 13th is the day. It doesn't look like it could happen, but it doesn't look like the Vikings and them are going to agree to a deal. So Kirk Cousins is going to be a free agent for the first time in 6 years. He is the number 1 player. Mayfield and Tannehill are 2 other free agent quarterbacks. I don't think that they're going to garner the respect that Cousins does. Cousins, it looks like Atlanta is kind of like the classic choice. His wife is from Atlanta. It's kind of a city that's kind of similar to Minneapolis in a lot of ways as far as population and all that stuff. It seems like a good fit, but Cousins to Minnesota seemed like a good fit. And in 6 years, they made the playoffs twice and won 1 game in the playoffs. So if you're Atlanta and you have 3 top 10 picks playing offense for you, you have an offensive line that you're responsible for building that's quite good. It seems like it makes sense. If you were trying to talk the Falcons out of Cousins, what would you say?
I would say this to you. Okay, I understand Kirk Cousins has a lot he brings to the table, And I've also said to you many, many times, there are limitations there, especially as he gets older. He's a tough dude. We all love him. Hopefully he wouldn't, injure another really important body part. What I would say to the Falcons, and we'll talk about this a lot, not for the scope of 5 minutes left in this conversation, Eric, but you have a guy named Ryan Pace who used to be the general manager for the Bears. And who did Ryan pick up in Chicago as a quarterback? Well, the second quarterback.
So Fields and Trubisky,
Okay.
Fields.
Fields. So with Fields now being kind of talked about, is there more of a comfort level to bring in Justin Fields into Atlanta where there wasn't because they passed it up in the draft, right? There were myriad reasons probably. I can't answer for the Falcons, of course. Go on record to say that. What I can answer for is the fact that when you're at a team and you pick a guy with your first pick, and it's a huge pick, you have a bond with them. They have a lot of respect and trust in a guy like Ryan Pace in that organization. By the way, fantastic football person. Any of the people that used to throw darts, he is. So how much cachet does Ryan Pace have in that building, who has, by the way, a great relationship with Terry Fontenot from their days in New Orleans? To me, this is a whole other topic of discussion that I find fascinating.
Yeah, we'll probably have to talk about that next time. I will say that kind of like the one that got away move oftentimes doesn't work because the conditions change. Like I've seen that happen a bunch of times where, the one that actually did work was back in the 80s when Jimmy Johnson tried to recruit Troy Aikman twice. One time to Miami, tried to recruit Troy Aikman twice. One time when Troy was coming out of high school and he chose Oklahoma, and then the other time when he was leaving Oklahoma and chose UCLA, both times over Miami. And then Jimmy Johnson was like, I'm actually going to draft you so you can't reject me this time. Troy wins 3 Super Bowls. But for the most part, like it has a hard time because the conditions change. And so I get a little bit worried about that. But I think Justin Fields presents an interesting conundrum because he very clearly was not given the best conditions in Chicago at times to succeed. There's a lot to work with there. And I think the Falcons, because of, like I said, their offensive line is conducive to a quarterback who might deal with a little bit more pressure, the running game that they have, his ability to move, I think it's a good fit. I would be intrigued by that. The musical chairs you might see Kirk Cousins, whose dad is a minister, all this stuff. If you see Kirk Cousins in Vegas, that would be an interesting pairing. But I think that might be more probable than people believe coming out of this week because of the Justin Fields situation, which will be super interesting to think about. This has been a lot of fun. The Falcons, by the way, have a top end of second round pick, which I do think is probably the going rate for Justin Fields. That is also something to consider. If a team is in kind of the back half of the first round and they have a back half of the second round pick, it might not be enough to secure Fields. So that is something to think about. That is something that the Falcons have going for them coming over this next few weeks, because it does sound like the Bears are going to make the decision on Fields soon.
Out the back end of a ... because you're leading into the next conversation. Are you sure it's only a second round pick? You don't think there's some thriving cats in the 20s that are like, man, we need this, and this is the way we're going to go. We see the development. We know we can work with them. I don't know if it's a second round. It might be.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, if it's Howie Roseman, he would ask for a second. So yeah, listen. So Tom, there's a joke that Thomas doesn't think I listen because I'm always like multitasking, but I do, and I keep them in the bank for jokes like that, which is always funny. This has been great. I really enjoyed this conversation, Thomas. It's always thrilling to get to talk draft with you because you bring so much insight. I learned so much. Thank you for all that joined the show, especially on a Tuesday morning, which is different than normal. We had pretty good reception here. If this is the first time that you've watched the show, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, tell somebody about the show. We are still going to go early in the week next week. We are flying to Indianapolis, so we might record the show early, maybe Sunday next week, and then just post it on Monday. We might not be live just because of our travels next week. We will be on Radio Row at the Combine. We might be on some of your other favorite shows. That will be a lot of fun. But yeah, starting the week after the Combine, we will be on Fridays on SiriusXM. So we're really excited about that. So for Thomas Dimitroff, for Eric Eager, for producer Matt Stopsky, this has been the Sumer Sports Show.